Hey guys, my name is Lena Abujamra. I know that's a mouthful, but I am so excited to be spending the next four sessions with you. We are going to go through a Bible study called Breathe, Finding Rest in the God Who Cares. Listen, I don't know how many times people will just catch me getting excited about something. It's going to happen to you. I know it. You're going to hear me teaching and you're going to be like, Lena, breathe. And isn't that exactly what happens to us in life? We just get so caught up with what we're doing, with the things that overwhelm us, with the things that excite us, with the things that are just in our lives that we just are trying to balance, that it just gets to the point where we just need to stop and breathe. And this is what this series is about. I love God's Word. I'm a pediatric ER doctor by training, but I teach God's Word. God called me to this about 15 years ago, maybe a little bit more. And it has been a joy to see God transform lives through His Word. And so, of course, the first thing I thought about when I was invited to do this series was you guys. And I thought, man, what could really encourage single moms? And I thought the story of Hagar would be exactly where I would go if I were a single mom. I am single. I am in my mid-40s. We'll leave it at that. So I understand how it feels to never be married and to have desires and things in your life that you want to happen that may not be happening. And that's exactly where Hagar is. And so we learn about her in Genesis. And our text is going to be, actually, we're going to have two texts. Today, we're going to start with Genesis 16, and then I'm going to take you to Genesis 21 in session 2, and then we'll make our way through the four sessions. We'll pick out some parts of the story that I think are going to be so critical for you to find the freedom that I believe God has for you. And I believe you're going to see God in a fresh new way, and I'm so excited about it. So, in session 1, I've titled this teaching, He Sees Me, I am not alone. He sees me, I am not alone. In order for us to really be able to breathe and enjoy the things that God has for us, we've got to get to the place where we even believe that He sees us. And so here's Hagar's story. I'm going to read it because I think you'll just get to know her through that. If you've never heard of her, no big deal. You're going to see exactly who she is, and I think you're going to connect with her very, very deeply. The story actually starts with Sarah and Abraham. They're the fathers of our faith. In Genesis 16, we read, Now Sarah, Abraham's wife, had borne him no children. She had a female Egyptian servant whose name was Hagar. There she is, Hagar, and her name means immigration or travel. And Sarah said to Abraham, listen to the brilliant idea that Sarah comes up with. She says, Behold, now the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go in to my servant. It may be that I shall obtain children by her. And Abraham listened to the voice of Sarah. I wrote this down on my notes because I just think this is crazy. I wrote, you will always get in trouble trying to accomplish God's purposes in your own human methods. It just doesn't work. And so here's Sarah. She knows God has promised Abraham a baby, and she thinks we're going to take this in our own hands. And she offers the servant who they had picked up in Egypt. And so they bring Hagar in, and Hagar has no say in the matter. She's a simple servant. And of course, it says after Abraham had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarah, Abraham's wife, took Hagar, the Egyptian, her servant, and gave her to Abraham, her husband, as a wife. And he went into Hagar, and she conceived. And that might be great news for some people, but I have a feeling this was a stressful situation for these people. But it says that when she saw that she had conceived, she looked with contempt on her mistress. Now, I'm a doctor, so I can tell you that if you put 2 and 2 together, you get 4. And so if Sarah and Abraham couldn't have any kids, and they send Hagar in to Abraham, and she gets pregnant, then now Sarah, you can imagine, feels pretty badly that maybe the problem with her ability to conceive is her own issues and not her husband's. And that would be my logical interpretation of this. And so Sarah said to Abraham, may the wrong done to me be on you. Now here she is, it's her idea. And she says, I gave my servant to your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked on me with contempt. May the Lord judge between you and me. But Abraham said to Sarah, Behold, your servant is in your power. Do to her as you please. So it says, then Sarah dealt harshly with Hagar, and she fled from her. So Hagar escapes, again, very true to her name, because she just can't take the anger that Sarah poured on her. It was Sarah's idea for Hagar to get pregnant with Abraham. And when it happens, of course, the whole thing becomes a huge, huge mess. And I don't know about you, but I know about huge messes in my life, things that I didn't anticipate that I desperately want to get out of. And that's where Hagar is. So now we pick up the story in verse 7. And it says, the angel of the Lord found her, Hagar, by a spring of water in the wilderness. And isn't that where God often finds us, in a place of wilderness? And it says, by the spring on the way to Shur. And he said, Hagar, servant to Sarah, where have you come from and where are you going? We're going to come back to the sentence in one of the future sessions, but for now, I'll keep reading. She said, I am fleeing from my mistress Sarah. The angel of the Lord said to her, return to your mistress and submit to her. Yikes. And then he says this, the angel of the Lord also said to her, I will surely multiply your offspring so that they cannot be numbered for multitude. And the angel of the Lord said to her, here's what he promises. He says, behold, you are pregnant and shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has listened to your affliction. And in my Bible, it interprets Ishmael as God hears. And so in all of this mess, we are promised that there's this God who hears. We're going to talk about that later too. And he promises he shall be a wild donkey of a man. And while that sounds really rude to us, it's actually a great promise of freedom in the outdoors, in the wilderness. And his hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and he shall dwell over against all his kinsmen. So now here's the verse that we're going to focus on in this session. And I know it's been a long setup, but we need it to know where we're going with this series. It says, so she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, you are a God of seeing. For she said, truly here I have seen him who looks after me. Therefore the well was called Beer Lahai Loroi, and lies between Kadesh and Bered. And Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram called the name of his son, whom Hagar bore Ishmael. So you can picture that she went back, told them what God had said to her, and Abraham, believed what God had, this appearance that God had to Hagar, and in faith takes on the name Ishmael that God had asked him to do. And so there's so much going on here, and it just boggles my mind, but it's worth stopping for a minute to breathe and see this God who loves us so much that he sees us even when we're in a mess. And so let me give you 3 teaching points here. Number 1, when I am treated unfairly, God sees and understands. Look, long setup, but the point is clear. Hagar got in a mess that she didn't ask for, that she had no way to control. In fact, I defined the wilderness. Really, it's easy to let my wounds lead me to a place of wilderness. Well, what is the wilderness? The wilderness is a place that I didn't expect to be, that I might not deserve to be, and that I desperately want to leave but don't know how. Sound familiar? I'm telling you, I've been there before, and it comes, these seasons of wilderness over and over again, and it is in that place that God shows up. And the thing that Hagar remembers about this encounter is that this is a God who sees us when we're in a place that we might desperately feel stuck in and want to be out of. And you know, it's so easy to let our wounds lead us to a place of total paralysis. I thought about, in my own life, the seasons when I've been engaged twice, and twice I thought, one time, 2 weeks before the wedding, I got that close, and then it all fell apart. And you know, it's so easy to try to blame who did what. And the point of it is, when you're in that place of pain, you easily get into places of paralysis, and they can be paralysis of self-pity, paralysis of bitterness, paralysis of isolation and shame, and probably the biggest one, the paralysis of fear. And I have more to say about fear that's coming, but for now, let me just make this point that in those situations where you know that you're treated unfairly, and you think nobody sees and the whole world is against you, there is a God who sees you. And this lesson is so powerful in the life of Hagar that she calls this place, you are a God of seeing. She gives God this name, and this is awesome. It's awesome news for us, because wherever you are right now, God sees you. He knows your pain. He knows what's been done to you. He recognizes it, and he's going to get you out of it. Here's point number 2 that I think is critical, because when I'm in those seasons, I don't have energy to find God, let alone to recognize that he sees me. Well, here's the good news. When I am too stuck to look for God, God always comes looking for me. Don't you love that part of the story? It wasn't like Hagar had to have some epiphany, like she's in the wilderness and goes, oh my goodness, there's a God in heaven, and maybe he's God. Are you there? Do you care? She doesn't do that. She's an utter mess. And in this mess, God reaches down and touches her with his love. And I found that to be true in my life. I remember the first time I ended the engagement, I ended up having a broken heart, not because of the guy that I ended the engagement with, but really because of another relationship that I thought would bear marriage and joy, and it fell apart. And that guy had been my best friend for years. And I remember sitting in my apartment in Florida for weeks on end, sort of having it out with God and not having it out with God, sort of the silent treatment where I'm just sat there going, what just happened in my life? And I had been a follower of Jesus. I had given my life to Christ as a child in Lebanon where I grew up, hence, by the way, the pronunciation of my name and the difficult wording of my name. But we had moved to Green Bay, Wisconsin, and I had dedicated my life to the Lord and done everything that I thought I should be doing, and yet my life did not turn out the way that I thought it should. And I remember in those weeks just just not knowing how I would get out of that mess. And somehow God brought 3 old people to my apartment door in the middle of nowhere. There were people visiting from the church, and God used them to remind me that he indeed sees me, and that when I'm too stuck to go looking for him, he'll send his son, he'll send his people, he'll send circumstances in my life to shape things in such a way that I see and understand that he's always there for me, that he sees me, that I am not alone. This is a God who cares about me. And then we see that played out so beautifully in the story. And then number 3, when my circumstances are out of my control, God is still in control of my life. Didn't you feel that when you read the story? Like, this is a mess. Honestly, I hate to keep saying that, but Hagar is living in a place that's just so out of her control. She can't change Abraham. She can't change Sarah. She's pregnant. She can't change that. I mean, she is just in a place where she has zero control of her life. And I think, as I think about my friends who are single moms, and as I think about my life as a single, we really have such little control over our future, don't we? And it'd be nice if we could just line things up just like so, but it doesn't work that way. And you know what I found is that God gets us to those places sometimes, or allows us to get to those places, because those are the places that we're most attentive to him. And so the nice thing about the Lord and the good news of the gospel is that when your life is out of control, there's still a God who cares about you. There's still a God who's able to change your circumstances. There is still a God who's going to take your mess and redeem it into something beautiful. We see it in the promise he gives Hagar. We see it in the direction. We're going to go back to that. I know you're thinking, man, how could Hagar go back to Sarah? But it's going to be a good thing. And God is changing Hagar's heart, but mostly he's teaching her who he is. And I pray and I hope that this session will remind you that God is for you, that he's not against you, that God sees you, that you're never alone. Hey, listen, you can breathe. There is a God who cares about you. He's doing it now. He's stirring in your hearts, and I pray that you'll lean into him and just do what Hagar did and say, God, man, I'm here. I'm willing. That's all I ask, and this will wrap up our session. I'm going to be with you again in the next session. I can't wait. I hope God will use this mightily in your life.